Friday, the final day of the week. These are the voyages of the program Unsportsmanlike Conduct. Its ongoing mission: to explore strange new movies, to seek out new bits and new edifications, to boldly go where no radio program has gone before. Acclaimed Movie Club. It's Acclaimed Movie Club. Acclaimed Movie Club. It's Acclaimed Movie Club. With Kent Wogelman of the Lincoln Journal-Star. Hi, Kent.
Good afternoon.
Sure glad you're flexible.
Thank you, Kent.
Oh, man.
We appreciate you.
Of course, you've seen every movie under the sun, so even if we did have to change, you could always revert back to what you had previously reviewed. But we always appreciate your willingness to change when the time is called for it.
Well, fortunately, I hadn't actually watched The Fifth Element, so at least I didn't watch it and then get to have the
That was the thing that I was wondering about. Like when we figured it out, my first thought was, we should probably punt to next week, because if Ken has already watched it, I'd feel really bad saying, and can you watch another movie now right before we do the segment? But thankfully, none of us had watched it, so none of us.
Well, none of us could watch it because it was never
it.
available.
It was not. Yeah.
It was available when I picked it.
Last Friday, it was available.
It wasn't never available.
And apparently, that was the last day it was available. But either way, we called an audible, and 1917 was the movie that we picked this week, and this is from 2019,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Nick, tell us about it.
1917 is essentially a movie about a couple of mailmen in World War I.
Good Lord.
There is
Mailmen.
a message that needs to be delivered to the front lines, warning about basically a German trap.
Yep.
And the only people that can do it is this guy who's really good at reading maps, and he has his buddy join him. And they just need to get from their line to the other line without getting killed.
Yeah,
basically.
Dying. Yeah.
That's it. It's World War I. It's really cool. It's really brutal. It's shot in this really cool, not quite one shot, but looks like it's all one shot kind of.
A one-shotter.
It's a one-shotter technically.
What
right?
do you mean technically?
Because it wasn't truly
Of
one
course
shot.
it wasn't. Yeah, that's impossible.
But imagine if it was.
Yeah, imagine if you could do a 2-hour movie and it's all one shot.
That would be
pretty
amazing.
neat. But yes, it's not. It's like we watched the Birdman. Birdman was similar in that it was supposed to look like it was one shot, and this was as well.
No, but that's 1917. It's just the journey of these two guys trying to get from one trench to the other trench without dying and relay this very important message to those commanders.
And I guess if we want to be nice, even though it is a 5-year-old movie, and not give any spoilers.
Let's give spoilers.
Well, it's really the story about one guy's journey.
One mailman.
Yeah.
Because
King Tommen, that was Tommen, right?
Oh, no!
Wait,
Yeah,
what?
That was Tommen, yeah.
That was Tommen?
Yeah.
The dude who bites
the Blake character is Tommen. Yeah.
Yep, he's Tommen. And the brother at the end was Rob.
Yes.
Rob with 2 B's.
Yeah, that I knew.
The King in the North.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's Tommen.
Oh, well,
I didn't realize that was
because
Tommen.
I actually felt bad when he went down, but then after
that was
now I'm like, I'm glad he died.
Tommen was okay, John.
Yeah, Tommen was fine.
Tommen was fine.
Tommen was an idiot.
Well,
He
so
was
was
a
this
child.
character. They're like, let's get this guy out and say, just kill him. It's a German. Just kill him.
But as far as
World
this
War
movie, I mean, to me, all kidding aside towards the acting, which is fine, to me, the star of the film were all of the one shots. And the way this thing was shot, I mean, from the travel between the trenches to the moment where he's trying, going through the ruins of the city, trying to avoid, the Germans, from, of course, the very famous run.
Yeah.
up the trench line to get to the finish line essentially and deliver the message. You watch it and it's mesmerizing if you allow first of all, it's mesmerizing just as part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started to watch it
you're looking right for.
Well, I'm watching it as if, man, they took this in one shot and they made it look like this. It's one of the best artistic films that I think we've seen in this in these 198 films that we've reviewed so far.
Oh, in that sense, yeah. Russell Deakins, who was a cinematographer, got the Academy Award for this, shockingly. Roger Deakins, sorry. Who got he won the Oscar. And if you look at it, when I was watching, this is probably the fourth time I'd seen it. I saw it once in the theaters. I saw it once right when it came on to streaming. And then I did a war film thing with little class, and we showed this. And now the thing that that hit me this time is also how that one shot there, it's actually 34, I believe it is, shots that were pieced together, the longest of which was 8 minutes. Just
wow.
A little is that if you watch the nature of that filming, it shifts. Okay, there's a break in there. There really is a break. So it really is not one shot. It's really almost two, but it shifts from following them to leading them.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Okay. That is the tonal shift in the movie as well, right? It shifts from, so I mean that's kind of brilliant. Okay. And the other thing that it hit me is this thing had to be storyboarded to the absolute last second in order to do this, because you're not going to retake an 8-minute shot,
right,
7 or 8 times. You're not going to, and you're only shooting one camera. Basically, you might have a coverage camera shooting the same thing, so you have to have it completely storyboarded, which meant it took forever to put this thing together. Mm-hmm. Sam Mendes is the director. He's a great director. And the whole thing, it's a parlor trick in the sense of the one-shot cinematography, but that pulls you into the movie, and then the characters and the story become more compelling. I don't know if that's the right word, but so yeah, I would agree with you on the artistic thing. I would also say that this movie, I wish you could have seen it in the theater.
It was awesome in the theater.
I wish I saw it in the theater.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have the same, it was almost overwhelming in the theater, right? Would you agree with that, Josh? It was
100%.
I'm kind of envisioning now what it would be like, especially
when he's running.
I think the trenches.
I think and also
the city with the fire.
Yeah, but the other thing that hit me too, and I give the art direction a lot of credit here. I mean, we've had a lot of World War I movies, but I think this one even better than the
All Quiet on the
Western Front, the remake that we saw a couple years ago in Movie Club. I thought it produced a starkness, because basically All Quiet on the Western Front takes place in the trenches.
Mm-hmm.
We are now, this is going in between the trenches.
No man's land.
No man's land, literally.
When they first go into no man's land and you see like body parts just kind of popping out.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that, to me, that was, I can only imagine what that would have been like in the theater, because it was overwhelming to watch on the little screen, because it was just so stark. and it was so bleak, and everything was, you mentioned the body parts, and everything was just, it was death. It was literally death, because nothing except for those two characters was living. Mm-hmm. There were no plants. There was no grass.
The tree branches.
It was just death.
Yeah. Yeah. When you mentioned the director, you mentioned the cinematographer. Like, I was listening to a podcast about the movie this morning, and it talked about how this was shot on digital, which, there's a practical reason why, right? Like, given the way in which they had to move the camera, the shot that stood out to me the most on this watch, and this was my second, it's fairly early in the movie. It's like the camera drops, and it's like really close to the muddy water, and they're kind of on the other side, and they're walking through it, and just like how that just kind of dips down into this area and follows them, and then they're leaving, and meanwhile, he just got his hand cut, and he's not wanting to touch anything, and you worry about disease and all that stuff. Like, I think that there's an interesting part, not even just like the concussion that leads to literally the screen going black for a few seconds. But I feel like the end of the movie, I found myself this time getting a whole lot more lost in the story rather than, I feel like the first 15, 20 minutes, I'm always looking for, all right, where did it do it? Where are they cutting? And I feel like at the end of the movie, that doesn't happen as much, which I think is a compliment of it, even though you recognize what they're doing, but that you're not focused so much on it being the one shot at that moment in time.
Which is exactly what I was kind of saying, the same thing earlier, how it pulls you into the story, and eventually it's no longer the parlor trick, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely.
The two things that I think we need to absolutely point out is this is not a true story in any way, shape, or form. These are all fictional characters, including the general and everybody else. This did not happen. It's based on stories that Mendez's grandfather told him, who was in World War I. My grandfather was also in World War I, but he never got close to the trenches. So he was, he was a farm guy from Nebraska, and they put him with all the horses, right? There was still a lot of horses being used in World. And so he took care of horses during World War I. But he talked about how awful what you were saying about the death and stuff. And he wasn't close to it, but, he even just being in, I guess he was just in the edge of France. And he was like, that's why they call it the war to end all wars,
Something that I love feels like a weird word to put in front of what I'm about to say, but loved about how this movie depicted war. Like, you always hear about how World War I is how it was, the technology advancement, nobody really know how to adapt to all these rapid changes.
Yep.
And in a lot of war movies, especially a lot of World War II movies, I feel like death in those movies is handled as kind of like this very big moment. It's this character you knew you had time to get to know, or it's like a big deal when they show somebody get shot. But with this movie, I think they did a really good job of showing the reality of people just dropped.
Matter of fact.
People just died, and then they were just so used to it. Even that part in the river, when he's crawling his way out of the river and he's crawling over all of those dead bodies, he didn't even think twice about that. He's just like, I just need to get out of here. And it just wasn't a second thought to him because he's so used to seeing bodies.
Yeah.
They did a really good job of just showing that without telling.
Well, and the other thing too, Ken, along those lines, and I know I was thinking this as I watched it last night, is that part of the world, and because what did you just say? War to end all wars. And a quarter century later, there's another one in the same part of the world.
Which is a lot worse than the first one.
And I'm just looking at, like there's the French woman who shows up for a few minutes with the baby, and it's just like, how many people dealt with these similar things where their towns are blown to pieces, things are on fire all the time, you're always frightened, you're always in hiding, you're always like, one of the things that happens early is the characters are talking about food. You're probably always hungry. Yeah. You're putting milk into your water canister. It's just
I was just going to say that when they found milk.
The ravage that took place in Europe, again, in such a short amount of time, pretty wild. And I thought that this movie did a great job of showing that. but also like the set design and how everything. I mean, that moment, you know, in that town with things on fire and, you know, flares or whatever, bombs going. It's just what a visual.
Also, the attention to detail is really going back to those people in the river. Those were civilians. So that made me realize those people at the bottom of that river probably came from that town he just came from. They probably just dumped the bodies in the river and they ended up here.
And as to the attention to detail, I think it's also worth noting that they went out of their way to make all the uniforms, everything exactly right.
Yeah.
Right. So even though it's a totally fictional story, the setting and the general idea, I guess, of it is very real or true to the time, let's say. And that my one quibble on that is the trenches were too clean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because remember All Quiet on the Western Front, those trenches were a lot different.
Yeah.
And that was where actually a lot of the death in the World War I was created because of disease in the trenches, not from people getting killed. That doesn't come across in this movie. That's not a big deal. But that was one thing that when they were in those German trenches and following the rats and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, this is too clean.
That is a thing that I did point out even while watching the movie, was how the German trenches looked way more put together and structurally sound than the English trenches did.
Yeah.
Well, that's that German engineering.
Yeah, I had the same thought too.
I said this yesterday, I think on the air, Kent. And you know, then Nick was like, "Don't watch trailers." The one thing that really sucks about this movie, even 5 years ago, was that they spoil the running across scene. It was in every trailer for that movie, and you know, it was that movie came out end of 2019, and so when it got to Omaha, it was early 2020, and so it was during every football game. And that moment, you know, I was last night I'm wondering, is it going to hit me as hard as it did the first time? And it doesn't, because it's not as grand and I'm not on the big screen. But that scene is awesome. And there's a behind the scenes featurette that you can find on YouTube where they show how they did it and the number of, you know, people that are actually there versus stuff that was digitally inserted. That moment is like when he starts realizing, like, I guess I got to do this. I guess I got to do this. And he's getting yelled at and then he takes off. It's a bummer that was in all of the commercials, because it would have been a really cool surprise if you didn't know that it was coming.
Yeah, I guess I'd forgotten it was in all the commercials. I had not forgotten that it came out in 2019, in part because I went to look up and see where I ranked this in that year. It wasn't on my list because I hadn't seen it until 2020.
Oh, okay.
Even though it's a 2019 movie, it hadn't played here anywhere or had the screenings here in 2019. It didn't play here till 2020.
Where do you think you would have had it? That was a good year for movies.
Yeah, it was. And I looked and you know, it would have made my top 20. I don't know if it would have made the top 10. There are a couple in the top 10. Like, I had put a couple documentaries in, and sometimes I just put documentaries in a separate ranking. And had I done this, I could have easily tossed those documentaries, and I would have probably slipped it somewhere in the bottom half of the top 10. Right?
Did you have Parasite number 1?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great movie.
I'm curious, Kent, because you mentioned earlier you saw this also when you were helping with a war film studies class a couple of years ago. I'm curious what the conversation was in regards to this just in general as a war film. As you mentioned, the story is not based in anything that is real. Not that it has to be.
Like Saving Private Ryan's not a real.
Yeah, exactly. Saving Private Ryan's not real. The Dirty Dozen is not real. But I'm curious kind of where it lands in terms of the modern war film, because I don't know if it's fair to necessarily compare this to, you know, like Patton, for example, which was made, 50 years ago. But I'm curious, how this is viewed as a contemporary war film of today.
I think the way that we sort of framed it is that it is, I don't, it's hard to say best, worst, that kind of thing, but it is the most effective example of a contemporary war, a movie made contemporarily that looks at 100-year-old war and yet manages to convey it's essentially a story of heroism and sacrifice and all of that, but also kind of a war is hell message right on top of that, as effectively as any contemporary war movie has done.
Yeah. You know what the other thing too, Kent, is I think it does a great job of explaining how, like, you can do all of this stuff, and then at the end the character is talking to Benedict Cumberbatch, and he says some stuff, go to the med center or whatever, and then he's basically just like, F off, get out of here. It's like he did all this. So we watched this whole story, and so for this character, it's 8 hours fighting for his life, trying to get to this exact moment, and then it's like, all right, see you later. Get on to the next thing. And, like, that's why I like when he's leaving, and I don't remember the rank of the next character who, like, really thanks him for what he did. But it's like all of that work, and at various points he's running into people that are above him in rank, and they're like, this is stupid. What are we doing? And so it's like, in a way, it is kind of a workplace drama, too, because it's just people bitching about, those who are above them and what they're making them do.
Even the way they ended the movie, how they ended it, how it essentially started, just to bring it all full circle, just to kind of let you know, hey, he's gonna have to do something like this again.
Exactly. There's still tomorrow that he has to live.
That is that sort of that futility of war element message at the end.
100%.
I love this movie so much.
What war movies? I mean, there are certain categories, certain subject matter that's always going to be a part of cinema. And war movies is one of them. What do you think the future is? Because we always wondered, at what point do we get tired of, World War II movies? But now we've had kind of this rejuvenation with this movie, All Quiet on the Western Front, of World War I. Where do you think we are in terms of the future of war movies, and what stories are still out there that would resonate with people today? Because sadly, we've had more wars since then. But yet it seems like for the longest time, Hollywood has always gone back to World War II or Vietnam, now World War I. But where do you think we are in terms of, the storytelling of war movies and how that looks moving forward?
The question that there is more, in my thought, if you're talking contemporary, war is different now than it was. One of the reasons it's, quote, easier to make a World War I or a World War II movie, or even a Vietnam movie, is you have clearly defined enemy, you have clearly defined battle lines, you have clearly defined this and that. Not so much in Vietnam, but for sure in World War I, World War II. You get to today, and the war on terror, so to speak, doesn't have those battle lines, right? So those kind of war movies work a lot differently. And there's a brilliant one in The Hurt Locker, right?
Yeah.
But that's not, you see The Hurt Locker and you don't think war movie, because it's not exactly what we've grown up thinking is a war movie, right?
Yep.
The Hurt Locker, there's Zero Dark 30, another contemporary, quote, war movie, even though it isn't a traditional war. So I think that's the direction that movies have to go in if you're going to try to capture anything of the last 30 years or whatever of war. But I think what you're going to see is more of the movies like this one. Peter Jackson, before he did the Beatles thing, did this, restored all this World War I footage from the British archive. I can't remember what the name of the film was, but turned it into a pretty effective documentary. Well, you can take that kind of a idea that you can get from that old film and then turn it into a contemporarily made film, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that happening. And then more of the movies like Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30 that look at these contemporary things that really aren't, we're going to set up and shoot each other in a battle kind of thing.
Good answer.
Well, that is 1917. It is on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
And I am still racking my brain trying to figure out where did I see this the first time.
So John DMs us last night, and it's funny because I had just started. I was like 20, 30 minutes in, and John goes, "We've already done this movie." And so I'm scrambling, trying to figure. I'm like, I swear we didn't. We had already talked on the air that because a listener asked,
right?
You guys did this, and we're like, no, that was all Quiet on the Western Front. John came to find out he had seen it. So you had seen it.
Yeah, I had seen it. I just
still doesn't know where.
I'm trying to remember where I saw it, and I'm wondering if it was a pandemic movie.